Imagine having a disability but not having the care that you need to manage your life. That's what many Americans are worried will happen if President Donald Trump's proposed healthcare reform is passed by Congress. I'm Femi Oke.
And I'm Malika Bilal. On the stream today, we ask how people living with disabilities are mobilizing against so-called Trumpcare. And helping us with the discussion is Loveland Anderson, an American Sign Language interpreter you see in the corner box. Stay with us. For Trumpcare to become U.S. law, both the House of Representatives and the Senate have to approve the legislation. So far, only the House has passed it, but that alone has riled up many Americans who are expressing outrage online and off. Protesters recently flooded a town hall held by New Jersey Representative Tom MacArthur, one of the architects of the new healthcare bill. Take a listen to what one of his constituents had to say.
My children both have pre-existing conditions from birth. One cardiac, one thyroid. You have been the single greatest threat to my family in the entire world. You are the reason I stay up at night. You are the reason that I can't sleep. What happens if I lose my job?
Now, that voter is not alone. People across the country are worried their pre-existing conditions, from asthma to cancer, could prevent them from getting coverage. The hashtag I am a pre-existing condition has gone viral in protest of Trumpcare, when people with disabilities, who are among the most vulnerable, are sharing their concerns. Here's activist Emily Ladau.
My name is Emily Ladau, and I'm from Long Island, New York. I have Larson syndrome, and without healthcare coverage for pre-existing conditions, I might not have been able to have life-saving surgery to correct an abnormal curvature in my spinal cord, or receive the physical therapy I need to ensure that my muscles don't weaken and I can remain as independent as possible. Because of this, I would tell my legislators to vote no on the American Health Care Act, because all Americans deserve healthcare coverage for pre-existing conditions. I am a pre-existing condition.
Emily's video is part of a campaign organized by the National Council on Independent Living and the advocacy group Rooted in Rights.
This campaign is part of a larger push to raise awareness before the Senate passes its own version of the healthcare bill. With us to discuss their advocacy, we have Julia Bascom. She's the executive director of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. In Winsboro, South Carolina, Vilissa Thompson is a disability rights consultant and writer. In Morristown, New Jersey, Elsa Shunison Henry is an author and disability activist. And in Plattsburgh, New York, we have Andrew Porang. He is a disability rights advocate who helped spearhead the hashtag and the movement Crip the Vote. It's good to have you here, everybody. Julia, I'm just going to have a quick look at your Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. A phrase that I've heard many times, really important: nothing about us without us. So healthcare reform. How is that phrase working out with healthcare reform? How involved are you with it? What are you doing to change the bits that you don't like?
So I would say that that phrase has become really central to the arguments we're making around healthcare. We have legislators passing laws that they don't really understand about programs they understand even less, and the voices of the people who are going to be most impacted by these laws, people with disabilities, people with other pre-existing conditions, are really being left out of this conversation. So we've really used that as a rallying cry. We're doing a lot to educate our members about healthcare and about Medicaid and how they can speak out, and also to educate lawmakers and policymakers about the programs they're passing laws about and what the consequences would be.
Educating lawmakers, how's that going?
It's an interesting process. It's frustrating because disability issues and healthcare in general has historically been a bipartisan effort, and so we've often been able to work with offices on both sides of the aisle. But now we have some offices that really are committed to understanding what's going on and listening to people with disabilities and creating good policy. And then we seem to have other offices that just feel that they have to get this done no matter the consequences. And unfortunately, that's going to really hurt a lot of people.
Andrew, I see you nodding your head. Are you having a similar experience?
Yeah, I think so. I think one piece of this that we've missed so far in the discussion is that some of these legislators are on a mission, right? They have an ideology about healthcare that the government shouldn't be doing as much as it does. the government should do even less than it already does. And so, they have an overriding pressure, which is, they think this is their only chance to basically roll back government health care. So in a way, those folks who are into that, we really are facing an uphill battle to educate them, because they feel that they know what it's all about already, and that our concerns, although individually interesting to them, probably just don't really mean much, because they just think it's important to roll back Medicaid, roll back government health care, period. And that's not all of them. I think that's a core group that are like that. The rest of them are just sort of like, well, I try to keep up on this issue and do what we can.
So it's because...
I want to point out...
Go ahead.
My representative, Rodney Frelinghuysen, for the 11th District in New Jersey, actually voted no the first time that the AHCA went to the House in March. But then he flipped, and he voted for the worst bill this time around. And he did it, we think, because he wanted to keep his chairmanship in the House. And so there's definitely a lot of politicking going on with our health care, and that's not acceptable to me at all. We shouldn't be, this particular issue shouldn't be a playing piece.
The same with my representative, actually. My understanding is she voted no. First time, she was a moderate, known as a moderate Republican, reasonable, all that kind of stuff, and ended up voting yes on a more severe bill for who knows what reasons.
There are people online who feel very similarly about their own representatives. I want to play a video comment from Robin Powell. She is an attorney out of Boston, and she talks about her concerns and her fears and how she plans to channel them. Have a listen.
Hi, my name is Robin Powell, and I'm a woman with a disability. I'm incredibly concerned about Trumpcare. If passed, it will have devastating consequences for myself and other people with disabilities. I am particularly concerned about the cuts to Medicaid, which will likely cut many of my needed services that allow me to live in my home. We must get out and we must resist. Thank you.
So she says we must resist. Now, what does that resistance look like? This is Lindsay on Twitter. She says, I want to share our stories, but we've been doing that. The honest answer, make sure they know we have power and can vote them out. And of course, the they there being House and Senate representatives. Vilas, I see you nodding your head there kind of knowingly. What are you thinking?
Oh, I agree with that. Disabled people are the largest minority group in the country, which means we are a very large voting bloc. So if we were to use our over, I believe, 56 million votes when it comes to the election, midterm election next year in 2018, then yes, we could definitely shake things up politically in getting those lawmakers who support this bill and anything else that jeopardizes our livelihoods out of office. I think that now is the time for disabled people to be politically involved and to vote, in a way so that we can get legislators who will listen to us. I think the thing we have to remember is that legislators are employed by the people being us, their constituents. And if we are not satisfied with what they're doing, then we have to use our power, which is that voting power, to vote them out and elect individuals that will listen to us and have our best interests in mind when it comes to what they're doing on the Hill.
It's not every lawmaker who doesn't understand the importance of what this healthcare reform might have on people with disabilities. I want to show you some video from Sheila Jackson Lee. She's a representative from Texas. Have a listen to what she said on May the 4th.
Throwing sick people down on the ground. No. Trampling on them. No. And saying things like, we got the votes, not that we've got health insurance for 24 million people, or that we're restoring the $880 billion out of Medicaid, or neither are they saying that it is important to take care of those with pre-existing condition, but yet they threw a pittance. $8 billion, 5 years, who knows and who cares? We don't know if they'll drop dead in 5 years.
That was drama right there. Julia, I'm just thinking about the lawmakers that you do manage to educate. What is it that you want them to do with this proposed legislation? Do you want to cancel it? Do you want to build it into something that was even better than the previous healthcare bill and law?
So we do think at this part that the process really needs to stop because it's clearly not being driven by honest concern or good policy. It's clearly just being driven by politics at this point, and we think people deserve better. There are obviously things that can be improved about the American healthcare system and about the Affordable Care Act, and we have lots of thoughts on what that should be and what that should look like.
Let me just stop you there, and you can share one of those thoughts.
Sure.
Go on.
We think that it needs to be easier, even now, for people with pre-existing conditions to access comprehensive health care, especially services that help us live in our communities instead of living in nursing homes or institutions.
Right. Okay. I'm just thinking about what might be possible then, and the timeline that you actually have to work in. Vailissa, I know that you are actually thinking about how do we actively campaign. What are you doing?
Well, I work for Rooted in Rights, and we're doing a campaign where we are allowing disabled people to express their concerns using the hashtag I am a pre-existing condition. And with this campaign, we want to humanize the experience of disabled people and their concerns. There are really real concerns that disabled people are having when it comes to the type of services that they are scared of losing and being diminished. So this campaign is a push to get their voices out there so that our legislators can understand what we fear when it comes to the possibility of having this bill come to pass. I think that a lot of our lawmakers are very detached. And like Julie was saying, you know, it's about politics. It's not about people. It's not about the constituents that they're serving. It's not about ensuring that whatever the problems that exist with the Affordable Care Act, which there are problems, be fixed, be better, so that everyone can have access to healthcare. Healthcare is a human right, not a right just for those who are privileged, not a right just for those who are not disabled, not a right just for those who are quote unquote healthy. This is a human right that we should protect vehemently so that everybody can have access to it. So really we need to, you know, as disabled people, continue to, you know, write, blog, create campaigns, launch campaigns, do whatever we can so that these politicians cannot ignore us or act like they can ignore us and do whatever they feel is in their right to, just because they have their own personal agenda and not for the betterment of the American people.
You know,
Bottom line, a bill that cuts 24 million people off their health care and kicks $880 billion out of Medicaid in the next 10 years, which is a 25% cut, is not a replacement, and it's certainly not a fix.
You know, picking up on what you said, Vailissa, picking up on what you said about this being a right, a human right. This is Ingrid on Twitter. She says, I don't feel safe pretending that I'm not expensive. I am. The dangers live in the $ minutia. I want policy analysts hunting them for us. She goes on to say the change that she would like to see is that right now we're seeing a public health issue misrepresented as an individual liberty one. People with disabilities, choice is surviving or not. So, Andrew, what do you make of how she sees this debate playing out, that this is a public health issue, really that this is an individual liberty issue over a public health issue, and this should be about public health. This should be about rights for all.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's referring to the rhetoric of the pro camp that this is all about choices, and you know that they believe that by moving everything down to state level, that's going to make everything more responsive, which is interesting because actually people with disabilities, we really do want things to be more responsive. But that's a somewhat separate question from actually having the resources. Like, yeah, I'd like it if it was easier to go to my doctor. I'd like it if my doctor, my hospital experience was better. But that, you know, cutting $80 billion out of Medicaid isn't going to make my hospital experience better. You know, and this idea of, well, this is all about choice and liberty, you know, as she says, that's really a smokescreen for cutting resources out of healthcare and taking the government out of healthcare, which is, as I said before, which is the overriding ideology at work here. There are people who simply don't think it's right that the government should have a responsibility, and they want to scale it back as much as they can right now because this is the only chance they're going to get. So all this other concern about cost and whatever, that's, I think, is a convenient smokescreen for this goal that they have.
Sure. Elsa, I'm just thinking about the level of healthcare that you have, if you don't mind sharing with us what some of that is, so people can understand when you have to pay out of pocket, what that actually means, the kind of funds that you have to find.
A prosthetic eye, like the one that I wear every day, I put it in my head every single morning. I wrote about it on the Boston Globe's website. It costs over $5,000. My insurance only pays part of that. So for me, that's a large out-of-pocket cost, and I'm not the only person who is paying costs like that. A wheelchair is a vehicle, and those cost an enormous amount of money to get a wheelchair that fits you properly. A wheelchair van costs an enormous amount of money, and if you want one of those, that's not covered by insurance either. A wheelchair may not be fully covered by insurance. We're not talking about minor costs. We're talking about major costs which radically affect our quality of life. If I don't put my scleral shell in the morning, I have migraines that will cause me to just be in bed. I don't have the option to live without my prosthetic eye. If you want me to be a part of society, if you want me to work, which is what I hear we're supposed to do, disabled people are either, not working and therefore sucking on the resources of the government, or we're working and we're getting too many benefits. I don't know which one I'm supposed to pick. All I know is if I want to participate, if I want to be a part of this world, I need to be able to hear with my hearing aid. I need to be able to get out of bed in the morning, put in my scleral shell, and not have a migraine. That's not an option for me.
So Elsa, as you're talking, I pulled up what you sent to our producers ahead of the show, showing us your prosthetic eye. You can take a look at it here on my laptop. And really hearing you describe how expensive it is, I think is eye-opening for many people. Of course, no pun intended there, definitely not. But I want to pause to go to this tweet.
And laughed. Thank you for that.
Exactly. And thank you for humoring me.
That's an in-process image too. That's actually, as they were painting it, that's the iris button that's set into the shell. What I'm wearing right now is a clear shell, so you can see here. You can tap on it, and that's, this is acrylic plastic.
So picking up on what you were saying, there is a tweet here, though, from someone named Robin, and I think it's like she was listening to your words and channeling that same imagery. She says, rather than see us as burdens, politicians must recognize what we offer, because I can work, I pay taxes, I contribute to society. Phyllis, I see you nodding there.
Yes, I think that we have to realize that every people do have work. Every people are able to contribute, whether we're working, whether we're just telling our stories, whether we're advocating, whether we're volunteering in our community, whether we're just existing. We do have worth, and that needs to be recognized by our politicians. I know, like with Elsa, with my own needs, I wear hearing aids, they cost almost $4,000. I have a wheelchair that costs a couple $1,000s to really receive. So having healthcare and people understanding how the system works and saying that we need these equipments, we need the resources to live, to thrive, to exist and be independent in our communities, and not be housed away in institutions or being, placed in the back room as undesirables. We are here, and we demand to be heard, we demand to be known, we demand to be respected, and we have value. So I really want people to realize that, yes, we are important, and yes, we are just as important as non-disabled people in the society.
And the other thing that I want to say, this is an anecdote from when I was a child. When I was born with congenital rubella syndrome, a doctor said, well, you can just give her up for adoption and have another one. She's going to be really expensive. Wow. And that's because this is what the health care costs were for me as a tiny baby. Right? Just give her to rich people. They can take care of her. That's not how this should work.
There was something else that surprised us that you shared with us, Elsa, and this was a conversation with somebody talking about why should people who have disabilities, why should they be insured? Why should they have health coverage? And his example was, well, you don't insure a house after it's been burnt down, right? You don't get fire insurance after a house has been burnt down. For us on our team, our jaws dropped and we were shocked. But is this the quality of debate that you're having to deal with? And are these the kind of people that you have to change hearts and minds, literally?
When I'm being looked at as an object, that's where I have to start from. You think I'm an object? Great. That's not what I am. I'm a person. So I have to pull people like that up, and I have to get them to see me as a human being before I can really engage with them on the topic of healthcare. And those are the people who ultimately don't believe that I have a right to healthcare, and they're wrong. But that's what we have to deal with every day.
I just want to remind our audience that about 22% of Americans are living with disabilities. That is an incredibly powerful block. But Andrew, how powerful do you feel in your advocacy and ability to lobby for healthcare reform and the way it's going, and maybe change the direction of the way it's going?
Well, I think we have a unique opportunity to have an effect because one of the most contentious issues in this bill directly relates to us, which is the pre-existing conditions provisions. That's not only the number one issue for us, it's the number one issue, period, of this bill. And that doesn't often happen. So that's an opening in a way for us to have a sort of authoritative voice. And if you will, the second most contentious issue is the Medicaid cuts, which disproportionately would affect disabled people. So again, that's an opening for us to be relevant in this discussion and not just a side constituency.
Mm-hmm. You know, you mentioned having that voice and where it's important to make sure it's heard. This is Cynthia Jones. This is her idea. She says, the Senate is taking things much more seriously than the House of Representatives. Is that a good thing? So, Julia, this is a little bit of a prediction because, of course, we all have no idea. But in your thoughts, right now, of course, this is past the House of Representatives. It still has a long way to go and a timeline that we're not even confirmed on how long it might take before and if it turns into a bill. But what do you make of it?
We can't relax yet. There's a real danger that the Senate version will seem on its surface to be more mild than the House version, just because legally there are a number of things in the House version that can't go in the Senate version. And there's a real danger that people will see that as a victory and as relief, when in reality it's still a very, very damaging bill. The rules of how this process works mean that they still have to have the same amount of cuts, which means that if they decide to lower the Medicaid cuts, for example, they're going to have to take that money out of somewhere else. It's going to be very, very difficult to craft positive legislation in this environment. And there's a real danger that people will say, oh, well, it's not as bad as the House bill, and relax, even though this bill could leave us in a far worse place than we were prior to this whole thing starting.
Let me just show you a tweet that Tina shared with us. And Tina says, my major concern is my son. He uses catheters. There are 140 for a box. He uses one box a little over a week, and currently he's covered. He wants to work, but it will bankrupt us if he loses coverage. He has several surgeries and more to come. He can reuse the catheters, but he will get infections, so he loses his insurance. If that happens, he will go back on disability. That is one story of many, many stories. Do you think, Andrew, that if these stories are shared and explained to lawmakers, that how healthcare reform right now is being developed might actually change if they just understood and knew more?
I think
that was a big sigh.
Yes, yeah. Well, I sighed because actually we've been operating on that premise for a couple of decades at least. That if they only understood our lives, they would make better policy regarding disabilities.
Right.
It's still a valid idea, and it's certainly what we're pursuing.
Sure.
But I mean, as I've said before, there's other factors at work here that we may or may not be able to overcome.
Goodness me.
One thing I do want to say, though, is...
And Andrew, I'm right at the last 10 seconds of the program, so what are you going to say? And make it count in a sentence. Go ahead.
Okay, if you're a person with a disability and you have a story to tell, don't worry about whether you can get all the policy details right or answer the critics. Just tell your story.
All right. Andrew and Elsa, Vilissa and Julia, thank you for being part of this conversation. It will continue at #AJString. Take care, everybody.